Good evening and welcome to Taking Stock here on ENCA. Education looking to return to normal as soon as possible. Government wants young kids to start going back to school from the 1st of June. Understandably, there's a fair amount of trepidation. We'll speak to a private education player this evening, somebody who represents homeschoolers, and wrap it all up this evening with Mary Metcalfe, a former education MEC who's now a specialist in the sector, about the complexities of getting kids back to school in the midst of a rising COVID pandemic in South Africa. Well, up first with us this evening is Stacey Brewer. Stacey is the Chief Executive of Spark Schools. It's an independent education business with 21 campuses, and up until the lockdown, educating 15,000 children every day, employing 1,000 teachers. And the lockdown put the brakes on education across the country. But this is a high-tech schooling model that uses a mixture of lab teaching within the classroom and, of course, traditional classroom teaching in its efforts to get better outcomes for young people at school. Stacey Brewer, have you managed to keep up using tech in any kind of homeschooling so far?
So good evening, Bruce. Yes, Spark has been able to offer an online distance learning portal for our families. But where we saw the huge challenges was more that the families are mixed in terms of the infrastructure that they've got at home. So a lot of families have great infrastructure, so they want more live lessons, they're constantly requesting for more. And then other families that have really struggled in terms of data usage at home. So we've really had to adapt our offering depending per family's need basis. And so we've really tried to work with them closely over this period to make sure that the kids can continue to learn.
Just how disruptive has it been? Because some kids will be ahead, some kids now will be behind, and your model allows for catch-up and it allows for extra tuition for some kids who may be struggling and allows for extension of others. But this makes it a bit more complicated, doesn't it?
So Bruce, what Spark is very good at is running schools and the blended learning models at the schools to ensure that our scholars are up to speed at international standards. So we are expecting what we are calling the COVID slide. We are excited that schools are going back from the 1st of June in a phased approach, but by then we'll be able to give you exactly what we expect the academic slide has been over the last 2.5 months. We are assuming that families will come back and scholars will come back at various levels. And we've tried to reinforce term 1 content, start with second term content. But the reality is, everyone's going to be at different stages. And so we need to make sure that we support those families when we start again.
It's going to be really tough. The curriculum has been cast into disarray, particularly for kids in many of the public schools who simply have not been able to do any learning whatsoever. Do you see your network being able to catch up by the end of term 4 or term 3 by December? Will they have a December holiday to go back to?
So Bruce, the idea in terms of our school year is that we'll now be moving to 3 terms. So we'll have a short September break and then it will be slightly extended into December. The aim is absolutely to get our kids up to speed by the end of the year so that when they go into their next grade, they are ready and prepared. If there's some instances where families are really or scholars are really far behind, we'll make sure that even into the new year, they will get additional support and academic focus to make sure that they do close that gap. We really need to ensure that no academic time is lost overall.
Now, South Africa is doing something extraordinary in that it's gradually opening up the economy in an environment where COVID-19 cases are rising, where deaths, which have been mercifully low relative to many parts of the world, are also rising. And how much trepidation is there about getting kids back into confined spaces and getting parents in on drop-off and just that dynamic that we all are familiar with when it comes to the school day?
So Bruce, overall, it's a complete mixed bag. Some parents cannot wait to send their scholars back to school. I think it's been very overwhelming for them. And other families that are very nervous. And there's fear around COVID and what will it do to their family and their children. So I think what's important for us at Spark and any other school providers is to ensure that we communicate as much as we can with our families, give them comfort that the necessary safety precautions are happening, and just constantly keep them informed.
How do you get 6-year-olds to wear masks for 6 hours in a row and to wash their hands? I mean, it's difficult enough at the best of times to enforce the rigors of hygiene and discipline amongst young kids. suddenly the game has changed quite fundamentally.
It's absolutely changed, Bruce. And I mean, we've just built in that, the mask wearing from the beginning as they arrive at school, we'll have to reinforce in terms of the classroom. We've actually changed our learning models in some ways in order to accommodate the necessary requirements for health and safety, and that scholars are confined to one area so you can trace their movements. But we're just going to constantly have to reinforce. And I think over the last week or so and getting ready for the 1st of June start, spending a lot of time with leaders and teachers, also reinforcing how important this is.
Teachers will be apprehensive as well. They are going into what, in the ordinary circumstance at this time of year, is a delightful petri dish of all kind of dubious childhood illness delights. And suddenly that is ramped up and puts them in the risk line as well.
Absolutely, Bruce. And that's why as an employer, Spark, we've also got to make sure that they feel comfortable. So we really are connecting with all our key stakeholders. And if there are any concerns, we will address them per individual basis. But we are assuming that we need to be flexible. I mean, Spark's taken the approach that we'll still feel the effects in 2021. And so for the next year and a half or so, we're going to have to be very flexible in terms of people's position and as things change over time and their personal circumstances change.
What do you do if parents simply don't want to send kids back to school? They're too nervous to do so. There are comorbidities. There's a parent at home who is obese or is unwell or has asthma, whatever the case might be, and they simply don't want to risk doing it. Is there a parallel learning model that you can use?
Yes. So we are making sure that we have the online learning that they could happen at home, but we're also now making sure that there's other ways of low-tech options that we can still deliver the service of education. And then obviously schools as an offering. We are looking at other product lines overall, even in terms of virtual schooling, because potentially, schools could open and close over the next few months. And parents, there's exactly as you mentioned, their circumstances change. So we want to ensure that learning doesn't stop and that people still feel part of the Spark family and that we are able to deliver on the service. So we are making sure that our different offerings are as flexible as possible to serve each and every family's need.
And when you go into this new normal, do you remain as ambitious in terms of your business growth targets? Because as a business, you have seen really rapid growth over time, and you have plans for further to triple the size of the business by 2025. Have those been disrupted? You've got people willing to invest. You've had very deep pockets in terms of people eager to improve education outcomes in South Africa. Are those disrupted at all?
So, Bruce, from a business plan perspective, we had to completely relook at it, and we have gone the more conservative route. So initially we're going to open more schools in the new year in 2021, and we've delayed that at least by a year. We just have to follow. And so we're just working with our existing shareholders, and there were other potential investors coming in for the growth story, but that will just be delayed until we finalize what that growth strategy does look like. So it's not that it's just delayed us by at least a year, but we need to make sure that Spark can survive and weather the storm. It's just a lot of unknown at the moment, and so we must just make sure that we are as prudent as possible.
Stacey Brewer, Chief Executive of Spark Schools. In a moment, the homeschooling revolution. We'll talk to the Association of Homeschoolers to find out whether or not they're anticipating a huge growth in that particular part of the education sector. You're watching Taking Stock on ENCA. Shaun Green is the chairman of the Association of Homeschoolers. Now, there are varying data points to suggest how many people are educated at home in South Africa, but I think it's broadly accepted there could be at least 100,000 kids under normal circumstances. But Shaun Green, that number has been significantly elevated, and I'm sure many parents cured of any dream of homeschooling, because I think what we've shown in the last couple of months is it's not an easy thing to do.
Yes, parenting is not an easy thing to do. The first time you're standing in a delivery ward and this precious bundle is placed in your hands, I know for myself, I was overcome with the responsibility. How do I take responsibility for this new life? And, I can barely take responsibility for myself. How do I take responsibility for this? But it is exactly that kind of say, overcome with awe experience, I think, that actually qualifies and equips a parent to do a good job. The parent that would be standing there and not taking the situation seriously, that would be the parent to worry about. So if you say you have a parent, the parent is worried, the parent is scared about their child's education, it's exactly that parent that is well equipped for this.
Are you seeing an increase in inquiries about homeschooling? Because for so many parents who face the possibility of kids going back to classes from the 1st of June and in a staggered way after that, many parents will be contemplating whether or not to introduce homeschooling as either a semi-permanent or permanent feature. Do you have an increase in inquiries?
Absolutely. We see it across all the social media platforms as well. We are finding more inquiries in other places to the associations. The Facebook groups are very busy. It's mostly two kinds of parent, though, that are coming to this now. The one kind of parent, I think, is the parent that just wants to do what is right during the lockdown, and when it's over, they want to send their children back to school. But there are also quite a few parents that are saying they're not sure if they'll be sending their children back this year, or they are also contemplating becoming homeschoolers more permanently. So it's a mixture. But yes, the numbers, we're quite overwhelmed with media requests as well as requests for advice from all these people that are finding themselves in a new place. They haven't been here before. And we are all experiencing profound change at the moment. It has to do with how we work, how we meet, and how we educate. And people need to feel that they've got some kind of support at this time. And so the homeschooling community has been quite overwhelmed by requests for advice and information at the moment.
There's a fundamental difference, Shaun, is there not, between virtual schooling, which is the school which is broadcasting some form of education to an audience sitting as you and I are now on a conference call, versus the view of homeschooling where a parent takes responsibility for a set curriculum. Do we see a hybrid developing? Do we see this changing fundamentally?
I think we find that hybrid, even across the across the entire homeschooling community, you will find that hybrid as well. A lot of the new homeschoolers will always enter the homeschooling way of life initially with schooling paradigm. So they will, it's not unheard of for mothers to pack lunch boxes and send their children across the yard to the Zozo hut. But that's expected, and because that's what they knew. But as time goes by, as homeschoolers mature, they start to realize that the school bell is not needed at home. And so the education becomes more flexible, more adaptable, more customized for that particular child. Each of us is different. Our children are all different. Any household that has a few children, you can even see in household, there's diversity between children. And so that's really where home education shines. You have the opportunity of customizing the education to suit that particular personality. And whereas in the school situation, you are trying to move large numbers of children through a system in a synchronized fashion. And so a lot of the measures that you see in place in schools are for that practical purpose. They are practical responses to moving large numbers of children through a preset system. Homeschooling, quite different. You rather learn about the child, you find out what is their potential, latent and patent, and you work with them. And yes, so that is a very, in the long run, after a family's been doing it for a year, even 2 years or so, most families change in the way they approach it. They start to approach it in a more flexible way, in a way that responds to the needs of the child.
Finally, and briefly if we can, do you see this as a critical inflection point for the way in which we educate children in South Africa? An opportunity to make the system that we put our kids through more practical and real and useful for a 21st century that we don't even begin to contemplate yet?
Absolutely, yes. The change that's been forced upon us now, who would have thought we'd be sitting here at this time? None of us could have anticipated this. And so with these changes that are taking place, what we really need to do is we need to be educating children for an unknown future. And to do that, we need to educate people that can accept change, that can bring creative solutions to the unknown. And I think home education really offers an opportunity to raise children in that way, as opposed to raising a standard child for a future that we don't and we can't predict.
Shaun Green, thank you very much. He's chairman of the Association of Homeschoolers this evening on Taking Stock. In a moment, she was the MEC for Education in Gauteng. Now, Mary Metcalfe is a consultant in education. We'll catch up with her as kids prepare to go back and try and play catch-up on Curriculum 2020. On to the final part of Taking Stock on ENCA this evening. Professor Mary Metcalfe is an education specialist. She's worked in the public sector for many years. And 2 months ago, or thereabouts, the start of this lockdown, Mary Metcalfe, you were concerned that we would lose the academic year. Are we moving quickly enough to regroup, do you think?
Well, it was actually Professor Jonathan Jansen who wrote an article that really framed the debate, saying we're going to lose the school year. I always resisted that because I believe that we've got to send a message that learning can continue in different contexts and that it's the responsibility of family and community to structure the learning, the day for young people so that they can learn, so that they feel productively engaged.
That's lovely in theory, but boy, in practice, unfortunately, lots of kids have been left to almost up to their own devices for 2.5 months now.
That's exactly the problem, is that the virus has shown a spotlight on so many inequalities, and a lot of the inequalities have to do with access to learning when you're not at school. The minister has been very clear, I think. She keeps saying that the average family doesn't have access to IT, doesn't have access to devices, and this is one of the challenges going forward.
Now, give me a sense of the timing of this thing. I mean, Angie Motshekga, the education minister, recently announcing that matrics and grade 7s would be going back to school from the 1st of June, and understandably met with a fair degree of trepidation from unions. Many schools aren't ready, it won't be ready. There's a huge amount of circumspection about the readiness of PPEs into the schooling system, the health of the kids when they go in there. I mean, it really is Hobson's choice. In the case of sending kids back to school. Are we doing it appropriately?
Okay, so there's several things to talk about there. Firstly, the minister has said that she would like to see grade 12 and grade 7 come back if schools are ready. And I think that we all need to be remembering that if. Now, getting schools ready is a complex challenge across the unequal levels of education support across our different provinces. Getting schools ready also depends on the key stakeholders working together effectively. We need the minister and the unions and the school governing body associations to be visibly working together and sending the same messages in terms of readiness. Then the big unknown, Bruce, which I'm very conscious of, is that when you say it's Hobson's choice, this is a huge challenge to many families who are anxious about taking their children back to school. And I think when we have schools ready, when we have the key stakeholders speaking with the same voice, then we need to be engaging communities and parents at local level, allowing them to understand what's in place at school, what are the advantages that are in place at school. This cannot be solved by a kind of command, all grade 7s are going back. It is, let's get primary schools working so that institutionally they are ready to support children. Let's get secondary schools open. Let's do it together. Let's inspire public confidence in the actions that we're taking.
It's a really scary time for children. It's a scary time for parents. It's a scary time for teachers who are in the front line of this process as well. The vast majority of our schools are really overcrowded as it happens in the meantime. I mean, the possibility of social distancing and hygiene and all of these deep complexities in a really stretched system make it very difficult to be able to do this effectively in a safe and functional and possibly sustainable fashion this year.
That's why the solutions have to be relevant to each particular school. There cannot be answers from above about how to do this. There can be a framework. So what children come back, in what grades, and what days, and in what hours of the school day will be a function of the principal and the school management team and the teaching being back, all being back at school, which will happen in the next few weeks, and them collectively working on the new timetable to achieve a 50% presence of children in the classroom, which will require saying we can't have all the learners in school on one day. How are we going to phase them? How are we going to stagger them? Which teachers are available to teach? So the question of the framework that comes from national and provincial, and then empowering school governing bodies to work with their key stakeholders to craft solutions that work for that school, and taking the parents and the community into confidence, and more so bringing the concerned parents to support the school governing body, to support the school management team. Who's going to clean the surfaces in between the two shifts? Who's going to be checking the kids for masks? Who's going to be making sure that children are educated? We need our faith communities, we need our community structures to step up and support each school. And it's not going to come from above. This is a matter of individual responsibility to care for ourselves, to care for others, to support our school to open.
And the fundamental issue here, finally, is that South Africa's got enough problems as it is. I mean, our deeply unequal society is exacerbated year on year by the huge disparities that we see in education. It would be lovely if everybody could be educated to a private school level. It's just not feasible in South Africa at the moment. And unfortunately, what this crisis has brought to the fore more urgently than ever is the impact of these disparities on our young people in perpetuity if we're not careful.
So COVID is a moment where, as South Africans, we have to say the inequalities that the spotlight is shining on now are unacceptable, and we have to accelerate and put more energy into ensuring that we have greater equity in our education system. Let's use the moment to say it's unacceptable schools don't have water. It's unacceptable that they have to bring in water tanks. It's unacceptable that so many children are not being fed. This is a moment for the nation to come together and say we've got work to do now and going into the future, and it's urgent.
Mary Metcalfe, thank you very much indeed. Professor Mary Metcalfe is an education specialist. Thanks for your time this evening on Taking Stock. And that's it from Taking Stock for this evening. My thanks to Mary Metcalfe, to Shaun Green, who is with the Homeschooling Association, and also to Stacey Brewer, the Chief Executive of Spark Schools. Kids are going back to school whether we like it or not, and parents are going to have to make some fairly tough choices in terms of the kids and their education and the curriculum, and of course the health consequences of the decisions we take. Until next time on Taking Stock, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.